The mining drill bit through solid rock like it was cutting through butter. Emma Rodriguez wiped sweat from her forehead and checked the readings on her scanner. 3 months on Kepler 7b had taught her to expect the unexpected. But today's mineral samples were breaking all the rules. The crystalline formations deep in the mountain contained elements that shouldn't exist together in nature. Her comm device crackled to life. "Emma, you need to get back to base camp right now." The voice belonged to Dr. Peterson, the colony's chief scientist. His tone carried an urgency that made Emma's stomach tighten. "What's wrong? Did something happen to the main drill?" "Just get back here. We have visitors." Emma packed her equipment quickly and headed for the surface. The journey through the mining tunnels normally took 20 minutes, but something made her move faster today. When she finally emerged from the underground complex, the sight above made her freeze in place. 3 massive ships hung in the orange sky like dark clouds. They weren't human vessels. The organic curves and bone-white surfaces looked alive, as if giant sea creatures had learned to swim through space instead of water. Strange lights pulsed along their hulls in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The colony's emergency sirens began wailing. Emma ran toward the main settlement, her boots kicking up dust with each step. Other miners and researchers were already streaming toward the central bunker, their faces painted with fear and confusion. "Move! Move! Move!" Dr. Peterson shouted from the bunker entrance. He was herding people inside like a shepherd protecting his flock from wolves. When Emma reached him, she grabbed his arm. "What are those ships? Are they hostile?" Peterson's face was pale. "The Galactic Council sent us a priority message 10 minutes ago. Those are Ravager vessels. They're a species that consumes entire civilizations for food. No one has ever survived an encounter with them." Emma felt cold despite the planet's warm atmosphere. The stories about Ravagers were whispered in every spaceport and colony she had ever visited. Entire star systems had gone dark after their ships appeared. Billions of beings had simply vanished, leaving behind only empty worlds. The colonists rushed into the reinforced bunker beneath the main complex. Thick metal doors sealed shut with a sound like thunder. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls as 63 people huddled together in the confined space. "The doors will hold," Peterson said, but his voice shook. "The bunker was built to withstand asteroid impacts and radiation storms. Maybe it will keep them out." Emma wanted to believe him, but deep down she knew that if the Ravagers could destroy civilizations that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, a mining colony's emergency shelter wouldn't stop them for long. Hours passed in tense silence. The only sounds came from the air recycling systems and quiet conversations between scared colonists. Emma sat near the communications console, listening to the automated distress beacon that Peterson had activated. The message played over and over, broadcasting their location and requesting immediate assistance from any human or allied vessels in the area. Then the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, bathing everything in red light. But in that moment of darkness, everyone heard the same sound. Metal groaning under impossible pressure. The Ravagers were trying to break into the bunker. "The North Corridor," someone whispered. "They're coming through the North Corridor." Emma found herself moving without thinking. While others pressed themselves against the far wall, she walked toward the sealed entrance to that corridor. Something was pulling her forward, though she couldn't explain what or why. The metal door began to buckle inward. Long tears appeared in the reinforced steel as if giant claws were peeling it apart like fruit. Through the gaps, Emma could see movement in the darkness beyond. The door finally gave way with a shriek of tortured metal. A creature stepped through the opening, and Emma understood why entire civilizations had fled from these beings. The Ravager stood 8 feet tall on legs that looked like they belonged to a giant insect. Its body was covered in armor that seemed to be made of black glass, reflecting the emergency lights in sharp, painful angles. 4 arms extended from its torso, each one ending in hands that were more like surgical instruments than fingers. But it was the head that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. The creature's skull was elongated and smooth, with no visible features except for 2 large, compound eyes that sparkled like cut diamonds. Those eyes held intelligence, but also something else. Hunger. The kind of hunger that could never be satisfied. The Ravager raised one of its arms, and Emma saw that what she had thought was armor was actually part of its body. A weapon grew from its forearm, extending outward like a bone spear with a glowing tip. The other colonists screamed and pressed themselves harder against the walls. Emma stood alone in the middle of the room, directly in the creature's path. She should have been terrified. She should have run. Instead, she found herself looking directly into those alien eyes. The Ravager stopped moving. Its weapon remained raised and ready to fire, but something had changed. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Its compound eyes seemed to focus more intently on Emma's face. For 30 seconds, that felt like hours. Neither of them moved. Emma could hear her own heartbeat and the quiet breathing of the other colonists. The Ravager made a soft clicking sound with its mandibles, almost like it was trying to speak. Then slowly, the creature lowered its weapon. It took 1 step backward, never breaking eye contact with Emma. The clicking sounds became more rapid and complex, almost like it was having a conversation with someone she couldn't see. Without warning, the Ravager turned and disappeared back through the broken doorway. Its footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond, growing fainter until they faded completely. The colonists remained frozen for several more minutes. Finally, Dr. Peterson found his voice. What just happened? Why did it leave? Emma touched her chest, feeling her heart still racing. I don't know, but I think it was trying to tell us something. Over the next 6 hours, they waited for the Ravagers to return and finish what they had started. Instead, the alien ships simply vanished from the sky. When a rescue vessel from Earth arrived 2 days later, they found all 63 colonists, alive and unharmed. The rescue team's report would eventually reach the highest levels of human government and the Galactic Council. But Emma kept one detail to herself. In that moment when their eyes had met, she had seen something in the Ravagers, gaze that no one would believe. Fear. The creature that had terrified civilizations across the galaxy had been afraid of her. The news feeds across human space buzzed with impossible stories. Mining colony survives Ravager attack. First contact, gone wrong, or gone right. The headlines seemed to multiply every hour, each one more sensational than the last. Ambassador David, Thane of the Centauri delegation, slammed his fist on the polished table in the Galactic Council chambers. The sound echoed through the vast hall where representatives from 47 different species gathered to discuss matters of interstellar importance. Today, they were discussing humanity. This is impossible, Thane declared, his blue-scaled, skin turning darker with agitation. The Ravagers have consumed 17 civilizations in the past century alone. They don't negotiate. They don't retreat. They certainly don't spare primitive species who have barely learned to travel between stars. The Corvallis representative, a being that looked like living metal shaped into roughly humanoid form, generated harmonic tones that the translation system converted to speech. Our battle fleets numbered in the thousands, our warriors trained for lifetimes in combat. The Ravagers destroyed us completely. How do 63 humans with mining equipment survive what we could not? Murmurs filled the chamber as other delegates shared their own experiences with the creatures that had become the galaxy's greatest nightmare. The crystalline beings from Nexus had watched their entire solar system harvested for biomass. The plant-like Verdani had lost colony worlds where they had grown for millennia. But humans, who had only discovered faster-than-light travel 93 years ago, had somehow made the monsters hesitate. Captain Roy Mitchell received his orders, while his ship, the Defiant, was already traveling through hyperspace toward the Outer Rim colonies. The message from Earth Defense Command was brief and classified at the highest levels. Investigate the Kepler-7b incident. Determine why the Ravagers withdrew. Report directly to the Joint Chiefs. Roy had served in the Earth Defense Force for 22 years. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belts and helped evacuate colonies from natural disasters. But he had never faced anything like the Ravagers. No human had, except for the lucky survivors on Kepler-7b. The Defiant was a good ship, but it wasn't built for war against creatures that could tear apart battle cruisers with their bare hands. It carried scientific equipment, diplomatic translation, systems, and a crew of researchers alongside the usual military personnel. If they encountered Ravagers, their best hope was to run away faster than anything had ever run before. They never got the chance. 3 days out from Kepler-7b, the ship's sensors detected multiple contacts approaching from the direction of the Ross 128 system. The signatures didn't match any known vessel types in the galactic databases, but their organic curves and energy readings left no doubt about their origin. 3 Ravager bioships coming in fast, reported Lieutenant Cole from the sensor station. They'll intercept us in 16 minutes. Roy had prepared for this moment, but preparation felt meaningless now that it was actually happening. All hands to battle stations. Power up our shields and weapons. Send a distress signal to Earth Command. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, but Roy could see the fear in their eyes. Everyone knew the stories. Everyone understood that Ravager bioships could regenerate from damage and adapt to new weapons in real time. The creatures inside them were even worse. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead ship," Cole announced. His voice carried confusion instead of fear. "They're trying to communicate." Roy felt his world tilt sideways. Ravagers didn't communicate. They consumed. "Put it through the translation system." The speakers crackled with strange sounds that hurt to listen to directly. Clicking mandibles, harmonic vibrations, and something that might have been speech filtered through. Vocal cords designed for an entirely different kind of atmosphere. The translation system worked frantically to convert the alien language into something humans could understand. Humans. We must speak. The bridge fell silent except for the humming of electronic systems. Roy had to clear his throat twice before he could find his voice. "This is Captain Roy Mitchell of the Earth Defense Force vessel Defiant. Who am I speaking with?" More clicking sounds, then. "I am..." The word does not translate well. "I am the one who decides for my swarm. We need to understand. You are not like the others." Roy looked around the bridge at his crew. They were staring at him with expressions that mixed hope with disbelief. "What do you mean we're not like the others?" "All species sing," the alien voice continued. "Their minds create music we can hear from great distances. Fear songs, anger songs, hunger songs. We know what each species is before we arrive. We know if they are prey, threat, or potential partner." The translation system struggled with several concepts, creating gaps in the conversation that Roy's imagination filled with terrible possibilities. "But humans..." The voice paused. "Humans are silent. Where other species broadcast their inner selves, you create nothing. Emptiness. It confuses us greatly." Roy began to understand, though the implications made his head spin. "Are you saying that other species are telepathic?" "Not telepathic as you might understand. They do not speak thoughts. But they radiate emotional energy, survival instincts, territorial markers. These things tell us who they are and what they will do. Your species radiates nothing. You are invisible to senses we have used for millions of years." The conversation continued for nearly an hour. The Ravager commander, who called himself something that the translation system rendered as First Hunter, explained concepts that challenged everything humans thought they knew about alien psychology. Every species in the galaxy operated on multiple levels of consciousness. They thought with their brains, but they also broadcast emotional and instinctual information through what First Hunter called the deep song. This psychic background noise allowed species to understand each other's basic nature even before first contact. Predator species could sense prey animals from light years away. Territorial beings knew when they were approaching the borders of another civilization. Hive minds could detect individual consciousness in other species. But humans were different. Instead of broadcasting emotions and instincts, they seemed to absorb and nullify them. When Ravagers used their psychic senses to examine humans, they found nothing. A void where instincts should be. This is why your colonist was spared, First Hunter explained. When my warrior looked into her eyes, he could not sense prey fear, or territorial anger, or any of the emotions that tell us how to respond. Without these signals, he could not know if she was enemy or ally. Confusion made him hesitate. Hesitation saved her life. Roy processed this information while trying to appear calm for his crew. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their fighting ability. It was their psychic silence. "What happens now?" Roy asked. "Now we must decide if silent species are dangerous or useful. Your people have made the galaxy quieter. Other species report strange changes when humans are present. Old enemies speak with civil words. Trade negotiations proceed without the usual territorial disputes. It is as if your silence creates calm spaces in the deep song." The conversation ended with First Hunter's bioships turning away from the Defiant and disappearing into hyperspace. But Roy knew this was only the beginning. Word of humanity's unique nature would spread throughout the galaxy. Some species would welcome the change. Others would see it as a threat to the natural order that had governed interstellar relations for thousands of years. As the Defiant continued toward Kepler 7b, Roy drafted his report to Earth Command. He tried to keep his language simple and factual, but the implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just another species joining the galactic community. They were something entirely new, a species that could change the fundamental nature of how alien civilizations interacted with each other. The question wasn't whether this would lead to conflict. The question was whether humanity would survive long enough to understand their own gift. The laboratory on Mars Station Alpha hummed with activity 24 hours a day. Dr. Alex Thompson hadn't slept properly in weeks, surviving on stimulants and determination as he tried to unlock the mystery of human consciousness. Brain scans, genetic analyses, and neurological mapping covered every available surface in his cramped workspace. 3 months had passed since Captain Mitchell's encounter with the Ravagers, and the implications continued to ripple through human space. Trade delegations that had previously avoided human contact now specifically requested human mediators. Species that had been locked in territorial disputes for centuries suddenly found common ground when humans were present during negotiations. But no one understood why. Alex stared at the holographic display showing a cross-section of a human brain. The image rotated slowly, highlighting neural pathways in different colors. Somewhere in this 3-pound mass of tissue lay the answer to humanity's unique position in the galaxy. His research assistant, Dr. Nancy Foster, entered the lab carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had made an important discovery. "Alex, you need to see this," she said, setting down the drinks and activating a secondary display. "I've been comparing human brain scans with the neural mapping data we received from the Galactic Council. Look at this region here." She pointed to a cluster of cells deep in the human brainstem, near the area that controlled basic survival functions. Every human subject shows unusual activity in this region, but here's the interesting part. This neural cluster doesn't exist in any other known species. Alex leaned closer, studying the data with growing excitement. What does it do? That's what I've been trying to figure out. The cells seem to be constantly active, but they're not producing any detectable output. Instead, they appear to be absorbing and neutralizing certain types of electromagnetic energy. The pieces began falling into place in Alex's mind. If other species truly communicated through psychic broadcasts and humans possessed a biological system that absorbed those signals, then humanity wasn't psychically silent by choice. They were psychically absorbent by evolution. "Run a simulation," Alex said quickly. "Model what would happen if you placed a human subject in close proximity to a species that relies heavily on psychic communication." Nancy's fingers danced over the control interface. The holographic display changed, showing two simplified brain models side by side. One represented a typical galactic species, broadcasting emotional and instinctual data in waves of colored energy. The other showed a human brain, with the mysterious neural cluster glowing brighter as it absorbed the alien broadcasts. "Incredible," Nancy breathed. "The human brain isn't just blocking psychic signals, it's creating a null field around itself. Any being within a certain radius would experience significantly reduced psychic interference." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. "How large is that radius?" More calculations. The answer appeared on the screen in stark numbers. Approximately 50 meters for strong broadcasts, up to 200 meters for weaker signals. But Alex, there's something else. If you group multiple humans together, the null fields seem to reinforce each other. A room full of humans could create a psychically quiet zone covering several square kilometers. The implications hit Alex like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't just stumbled into their role as galactic mediators. Evolution had specifically equipped them to neutralize the psychic background noise that had shaped interstellar civilization for millions of years. But evolution didn't create complex traits without reason. If humans had developed psychic absorption abilities, what had they been protecting themselves from? Over the following weeks, Alex's research team expanded their investigation. They studied historical records from early human civilization, looking for evidence of psychic phenomena in humanity's past. They analyzed the genetic markers associated with the neural cluster, tracing its development through human evolution. The answers they found were disturbing. According to their genetic analysis, the psychic absorption trait had appeared in human DNA approximately 50,000 years ago, during the same period when early humans had begun developing complex language and social structures. But the trait hadn't developed gradually through natural selection. It had appeared suddenly, as if something had triggered a rapid evolutionary adaptation. It's almost like humans were exposed to intense psychic interference at a crucial point in their development, Nancy explained during their weekly briefing. The brain adapted to protect itself, but the adaptation was so extreme that it completely blocked all psychic input and output. Alex reviewed the data from their latest experiments. Human test subjects had been placed in controlled environments with volunteers from psychically active species. The results were consistent and remarkable. Alien subjects reported feeling unusually calm and clear-headed when humans were present. They described being able to think without the constant background noise of instinctual responses and emotional broadcasts. Some said it was the first time in their lives they had experienced true mental silence. But the most significant discovery came from an unexpected source. The crystalline beings from Nexus, who communicated primarily through harmonic vibrations, in their silicon-based bodies, had sent a delegation to observe the human research. The lead Nexus representative, a towering figure that looked like living crystal shaped into a roughly humanoid form, provided the crucial piece of the puzzle. During a formal meeting with Alex's team, "Your species puzzles us greatly," the being said, its translated voice carrying harmonic undertones that made the air shimmer. "We have studied the galactic fossil records extensively. Many civilizations have risen and fallen over millions of years, but all shared certain characteristics. All broadcast psychic energy. All participated in the deep song that connects conscious minds across space." The crystalline being paused, its internal light patterns shifting to deeper colors. Until now, we believe this was a universal trait of intelligent life. But your research suggests something different. What if psychic broadcasting is not natural? What if it is artificial? Alex felt his understanding of the galaxy shift once again. Are you suggesting that psychic abilities were imposed on other species? We are suggesting that perhaps your species alone has remained natural, pure, while the rest of us have been modified. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If the Nexus representative was correct, then humanity wasn't, an exception to galactic civilization. They were a remnant of what galactic civilization had been like before some unknown force had altered the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. The research team spent weeks verifying this theory, cross-referencing their findings with archaeological data from across the galaxy. The evidence supported a terrifying conclusion. Approximately 50,000 years ago, something had swept across the galaxy, modifying the neural structures of every intelligent species it encountered. The modifications enhanced psychic communication abilities, but they also created a form of mental dependency. Species became addicted to the constant flow of emotional and instinctual broadcasts. They lost the ability to think clearly without external psychic input. Humanity had been too young, too primitive, or too isolated to be caught in this wave of forced evolution. Instead, they had developed defenses against it. The neural cluster that absorbed psychic energy wasn't just a unique trait. It was humanity's immune system response to galactic-scale mental manipulation. Now, tens of thousands of years later, humans were returning to a galaxy filled with species that had forgotten how to think for themselves. Their presence was gradually awakening minds that had been artificially modified into dependence on psychic communication. Alex completed his final report with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion and caffeine. The document would be transmitted to every human colony and research station in known space. It would also be shared with selected alien species who had proven themselves trustworthy. But as he prepared to send the data, Alex realized that this discovery made humanity incredibly valuable to some beings and incredibly dangerous to others. Any power structure that relied on psychic manipulation to maintain control would see humans as an existential threat. War was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. The emergency session of the Galactic Council lasted 17 hours. Representatives from dozens of species argued, threatened, and pleaded as news of humanity's true nature spread throughout civilized space. Ambassador Sarah Kim watched the proceedings from the human delegation's booth, knowing that every word spoken in this chamber could determine whether her species would survive the next few months. The debate had been raging since Dr. Thompson's research findings had been leaked to the galactic press. Some species hailed the discovery as the key to a new age of clear thinking and peaceful cooperation. Others saw it as evidence that humans were a dangerous contamination that needed to be eliminated before they could corrupt galactic civilization. The hegemony delegation sat in the center of the Great Hall like a dark star around which all other arguments revolved. Formed by the 12 oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, the hegemony had maintained order through subtle psychic influence for over 10,000 years. Their representatives rarely spoke during council sessions, but their presence shaped every decision through the constant broadcast of authority and control. Today, they finally broke their silence. High Chancellor Vexmore of the Dominar Empire stood to address the assembly. The Dominar were an ancient reptilian species whose psychic abilities were legendary even among other telepathic races. When Vexmore spoke, his words carried layers of meaning that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the subconscious minds of everyone present, everyone except the humans. "Honored colleagues," Vexmore began, his voice carrying harmonics that made other delegates lean forward attentively. We face a crisis that threatens the very foundation of our civilized galaxy. For millennia, we have maintained peace through understanding, cooperation through shared consciousness, progress through the unity of minds working in harmony. Sarah felt her skin crawl as she watched the effect of the Dominar's speech on the other delegates. Their postures became more relaxed, their expressions more agreeable. Even species that had been arguing violently just minutes before now nodded, along with Vexmore's words. But now we discover that one species among us is immune to this unity. Worse, they actively disrupt it, creating pockets of mental chaos wherever they go. Is this the peace we desire? Is this the cooperation we have worked so hard to achieve? The Alteran delegate, a being that resembled a large bird made of metallic feathers, stood to respond. The humans have brought nothing but benefits to our trade negotiations. For the first time in centuries, we have been able to discuss terms without the influence of territorial instincts or predatory impulses. Vexmore's response carried a subtle psychic undertone that Sarah couldn't detect, but could see the effects of clearly. Friend Alteran, consider this. If humans can disrupt beneficial instincts, what other natural responses might they interfere with? Parental protection of young, species preservation instincts, the very drives that have allowed our civilizations to survive and prosper? Sarah watched in growing horror as the Alteran delegate's expression changed from supportive to doubtful. Around the chamber, similar transformations were taking place as Vexmore's psychic influence spread through the assembly. The human delegation was completely unaffected, which only made the situation more surreal. Sarah could see the manipulation happening in real time, but she was powerless to stop it or even explain it to the beings who were being influenced. We propose a simple solution, Vexmore continued. Humanity should be confined to their current territory. No expansion beyond their existing colonies. No involvement in interspecies negotiations. No interference in the natural order that has served our galaxy so well. The vote that followed was a foregone conclusion. Species that had welcomed human involvement in their affairs just days earlier now voted to isolate humanity from the rest of galactic civilization. The final tally was 38 votes in favor of containment, with only 7 species voting against and 2 abstaining. As the session ended and delegates filed out of the chamber, Sarah noticed something that chilled her blood. The 7 species that had voted against the containment proposal were all ones that had minimal psychic abilities. The aquatic beings from Oceanus Prime, whose evolution had never developed telepathic traits. The mechanical intelligences of the Forge worlds, who had built themselves from metal and circuits, rather than growing from organic minds. The pattern was clear. Any species that could think independently had supported humanity. Everyone else had been manipulated into compliance. General Patricia Wells received the Council's decision while standing in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. The massive chamber buzzed with activity as Earth's defense forces prepared for what seemed like an inevitable conflict. Holographic displays showed the deployment of ships throughout human space, turning civilian colonies into military strongholds overnight. "How long do we have?" Patricia asked her intelligence chief. "Hegemony fleets are already massing at 3 points along our border," came the reply. "Best estimate is 72 hours before they begin their advance. They're not bothering to hide their movements." Patricia studied the tactical display with grim determination. Earth's combined military might consisted of 237 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels hastily fitted with whatever weapons technology their allies could provide. The hegemony was bringing 8 times that number, including battle cruisers that had been perfecting their designs for thousands of years, but humanity wasn't entirely alone. Report on Allied support. The Ravagers have positioned bioship swarms at our outer colonies. They're not officially joining the fight, but they're making it clear that anyone attacking human settlements will face them too. The Nexus Collective has provided energy weapons and defensive technologies. The Oceanic Republic is offering their stealth ships for reconnaissance. And the defections? This was the most encouraging news. As word of the hegemony's manipulation spread through channels that their psychic influence couldn't reach, entire fleets had begun abandoning their posts. Species that had served the ancient alliance for millennia were suddenly questioning orders they had followed without thought for generations. 17 major defections confirmed, with more expected. The Draconan Third Fleet has declared neutrality and withdrawn to their home system. The Corvallis warrior clans are requesting asylum in human space, claiming they want to experience what they call clear battle thought for the first time in their history. Patricia felt a flicker of hope. If enough hegemony members awakened to their manipulation, the ancient alliance might collapse from within. But that would take time, and time was the one resource humanity didn't have. The first attacks came not from hegemony fleets, but from something far more insidious. Automated probes began appearing throughout human space, broadcasting psychic interference on frequencies that human brains couldn't detect, but that caused severe disorientation in their alien allies. The Ravager bioships were the first to be affected. Their swarm coordination broke down as the psychic noise overwhelmed their communication abilities. Within hours, the powerful alien vessels were fleeing to the outer edges of human territory, unable to function in the increasingly chaotic psychic environment. Patricia watched the reports flow in from across human space. The hegemony wasn't just planning to attack humanity directly. They were turning humanity's greatest asset, their ability to create psychic calm, against them by making it impossible for any psychically sensitive species to remain in human territory. They're isolating us, Patricia realized. Every alien ally we have is being driven away by the interference. When their main fleets arrive, we'll be facing them alone. But as the general prepared for humanity's darkest hour, reports began arriving that changed everything. The psychic interference that was driving away humanity's allies was having an unexpected effect on the hegemony's own forces. Ships throughout the ancient alliance were experiencing mysterious breakdowns in chain of command. Crews that had obeyed. Their officers, without question for their entire careers, were suddenly questioning orders. Some vessels had gone completely silent, their crews presumably dealing with the psychological shock of thinking independently for the first time. Patricia allowed herself a grim smile as she realized what was happening. The hegemony's plan to isolate humanity was backfiring spectacularly. The psychic interference meant to drive away human allies was also disrupting the mental control that held their own empire together. The ancient alliance had forgotten that their power was based entirely on psychic manipulation. Remove that manipulation, and their vast empire became a collection of confused, newly awakened civilizations with no reason to follow orders from beings they barely understood. The war that everyone expected to last years might be over in a matter of weeks. The only question was whether the galaxy would survive the massive psychological awakening that was about to sweep across thousands of worlds. The first transmission came from a hegemony battlecruiser 12 hours before the scheduled invasion of human space. Captain Lisa Park was monitoring long-range communications from the bridge of the research vessel Discovery when the message appeared on her screens. "This is Commander Telvar of the Corvallis heavy destroyer Righteous Fury. We can think clearly for the first time in generations. The orders we were given make no sense. Why are we attacking a species that has brought peace to our negotiations? Why are we following leaders we have never chosen?" Lisa stared at the message in amazement. The psychic interference that the hegemony had deployed to isolate humanity was spreading much further than anyone had anticipated. Their own fleets were beginning to question the mental conditioning that had controlled them for thousands of years. More transmissions followed throughout the day. Entire squadrons declaring independence from hegemony command. Ship captains broadcasting their confusion and anger as they realized how thoroughly their thoughts had been manipulated. Some vessels simply stopped responding to orders, their crews presumably struggling to understand their new mental freedom. Admiral Carter Hayes watched the tactical displays from his command ship, Earth's Pride, as the most powerful military force in galactic history began to tear itself apart. The hegemony's invasion fleet was still approaching human territory, but their formation was becoming increasingly chaotic as individual ships broke away from the main force. "Status report on enemy forces," Carter requested. "Approximately 40% of their fleet has gone silent or declared neutrality," his tactical officer reported. "Another 30% are showing erratic movement patterns, suggesting internal conflicts. We estimate less than 30% of their original strength remains under central command," Carter nodded grimly. Even 30% of the hegemony fleet represented a force that could devastate human civilization, but the situation was changing by the hour, and not all the changes favored humanity. Reports were coming in from hegemony core worlds describing complete societal breakdown. Populations that had been psychically controlled for millennia were suddenly experiencing free will, and many couldn't handle the shock. Some planets descended into chaos, as beings who had never made independent decisions found themselves overwhelmed by choice and possibility. The ancient leaders of the hegemony, stripped of their psychic influence, were revealed as fragile, desperate creatures clinging to power they no longer deserved. On Dominar Prime, High Chancellor Vexmore had barricaded himself in his palace as his own people discovered the truth about their government's methods of control. But the most significant change was happening on a smaller, more personal level throughout the galaxy. Species that had been enemies for centuries were suddenly able to communicate without the interference of territorial instincts and predatory responses. Trade disputes that had seemed impossible to resolve were settled in hours once negotiators could think clearly about their actual needs rather than their programmed reactions. Emma Rodriguez, the mining engineer whose encounter with a Ravager had started everything, found herself appointed as humanity's first consciousness liberation coordinator. Her job was to help newly freed civilizations adapt to independent thought, a task that required equal parts psychology, diplomacy, and infinite patience. The hardest cases came from species that had been under psychic control for so long, they had forgotten how to make basic decisions. Emma worked with a team of human psychologists and alien volunteers to establish support centers throughout the galaxy. These facilities became safe spaces where beings could learn to think without external influence, often for the first time in their lives. The breakthrough moment came when Emma received a personal message from First Hunter, the Ravager commander, who had first explained humanity's unique nature to Captain Mitchell months earlier. "The Silence Makers have given us something we did not know we had lost," the translated message read. "For millions of years, my people have hunted and consumed because the deep song told us we were predators. Now, in the quiet spaces you create, we remember that we once chose what to eat and when to hunt. We are learning to be beings of choice rather than beings of instinct." The Ravagers, the most feared species in the galaxy, were adapting to peaceful coexistence faster than anyone had expected. Their bioships began appearing at human colonies not as threats, but as curious visitors wanting to experience extended periods of psychic silence. Some Ravager individuals requested permanent assignment to human research stations, claiming that the mental clarity helped them rediscover parts of their culture that had been lost for eons. But the real revolution was happening on the former hegemony worlds. As the ancient government's psychic network collapsed, entire populations were experiencing consciousness in its pure form for the first time. The results were often chaotic, sometimes violent, but ultimately transformative. On Altair 7, a species that had been bred for mining work discovered they had natural artistic abilities that had been suppressed by their psychic conditioning. Within weeks, their underground cities bloomed with sculptures and murals expressing emotions they were finally free to feel. The mechanical beings of the Forge worlds, who had already possessed limited psychic sensitivity, became humanity's strongest allies in helping other species adapt to mental freedom. Their logical, systematic approach to consciousness made them ideal teachers for beings struggling with their first taste of independent thought. The war that everyone had expected never really materialized. Instead of a massive military conflict, the galaxy experienced something unprecedented. A revolution of consciousness that spread from world to world, not through conquest, but through the simple desire to think clearly. The few hegemony forces that remained loyal to their ancient commanders found themselves increasingly isolated. Without the psychic influence that had held their empire together, the hegemony's military might prove to be largely illusory. Ships designed to inspire fear and obedience through psychic broadcasts became ineffective when their targets could no longer receive those broadcasts. The decisive moment came when the last major hegemony fleet, commanded by High Admiral Zorthak of the Varian Empire, arrived at the edge of human space with nearly 200 ships still under central command. Emma was aboard the diplomatic vessel that met them at the border. The negotiation took place in a conference room specially designed to maximize humanity's psychic null effect. High Admiral Zorthak, a being that resembled a massive spider made of crystallized energy, entered the room radiating confidence and authority. 20 minutes later, he was sobbing. "What have we done?" Zorthak whispered as his artificial psychic enhancements failed in the presence of so many humans. "We have controlled and manipulated for so long that we forgot why we began. My people were explorers once, scientists. We wanted to understand the universe, not dominate it." The High Admiral's confession was broadcast throughout his fleet. Within hours, ship after ship was declaring independence from hegemony command. Crews that had served the ancient alliance without question for their entire lives suddenly understood that they had been slaves to beings who had forgotten their own humanity. The transformation wasn't always smooth. Some worlds experienced years of upheaval as populations struggled to build new governments based on actual choice rather than psychic manipulation. Others descended into temporary chaos as species that had been artificially unified split into factions based on genuine philosophical differences. But gradually, a new form of galactic civilization began to emerge. Trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than psychic coercion. Diplomatic relations founded on honest communication rather than mental manipulation. Scientific cooperation, driven by genuine curiosity rather than programmed responses. Humanity found itself not as the rulers of this new galaxy, but as its gardeners. Human settlements became pilgrimage sites where beings came to experience pure thought. Universities were established where former slaves could learn to make decisions without external influence. Research centers studied the long-term effects of psychic liberation on different species. Emma often worked 16-hour days, traveling from world to help establish new governance systems and resolve conflicts between newly awakened populations. But the work was deeply rewarding. Every day brought reports of species rediscovering lost aspects of their culture, forming new relationships based on genuine compatibility, or simply learning to appreciate the experience of thinking their own thoughts. The galaxy was learning to think for itself, and for the first time in its recorded history, it was thinking clearly. Standing in her office overlooking the bustling spaceport of New Geneva Station, Emma reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from a simple mining engineer to one of the most important figures in galactic history. The encounter with that Ravager warrior seemed like a lifetime ago, but she could still remember the moment when their eyes had met and everything had changed. Humanity hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior weapons or advanced technology. They had liberated it through the simple act of being themselves. Beings capable of thought without external influence, consciousness without manipulation, choice without coercion. The universe was vast and full of wonders that no single species could explore alone. But now, for the first time, all the species of the galaxy could choose to explore it together, united not by psychic control, but by the shared experience of freedom. The silent revolution was complete, and the galaxy would never be the same.